First thing I'm going to do is get in here and loosen the lug nuts before I've jacked it up. So I've loosened all 6 lug nuts here, and that enables me to get a good torque on them before I lift it up, and then the wheel would spin when I'm trying to release them. So you want to do that before you jack up the vehicle. Okay, next thing I'm going to do is use a floor jack to lift up the passenger side of the vehicle here. And I'm going to use the jacking point recommended by the manufacturer right underneath the front suspension here. Okay, so this is the jacking point I'm going to use. It's right underneath the front suspension. What I'll do is jack this up with the floor jack, and then I'll move in some jack stands as soon as it's up there. Okay, so I have a jack stand set up right next to the jacking point, and then I have another one as a safeguard back on the frame, back over here. So now we're off the ground with the lug bolts loosened already. So we have a little bit of space to get the tire off here. And now the fun begins. So this is basically the process of removing the calipers and then the rotors, because I'm going to change up both the pads, which are in here, as well as the rotors, which you can see are really rusted there, and I'll put a new shiny pair on. First I'll just pull that off of there. That should have come off with the wheel. And now you have a hub underneath here. There's nothing to take off as far as a bolt goes in a 97 4Runner. This is going to be basically just a lot of banging to get the rotor off. But what we're going to do is we're going to start out by a couple different steps here. Right here is a 17mm bolt, and another 17mm bolt right down here. And these are going to need to come off first. So we're going to do that. We're also going to pull this little clip off right here. Now, a lot of instructions out there recommend that you bleed the brakes. These are really hard to loosen up in a lot of cases, especially with an older truck, and I haven't been able to do that. Get it loosened up. I'll attempt again on this side, but on the other side what I did was I drained a bit of fluid with a syringe out of the reservoir for brake fluid up top, and then I also opened up the cap so that basically any pressure would just push the level up a little bit and not cause any more problems than that as far as the brake fluid goes. So we'll just get these 17mm bolts off, and I'm likely going to have to use some liquid wrench or WD-40 to get these started, because they're on there pretty good. I don't have an impact wrench. I use a torque wrench for this, so I'll show you the tools, or you've seen the tools at the beginning of this video. Okay, so here's a short list of the tools that we need right here. We have a big lug wrench to get the lug bolts off. I have a pair of gloves because I'm probably going to bang my hands on something as I'm trying to force off some of these bolts. Then I have a little pliers here, and that's going to help me to get off one of the clips that holds the hard brake line to the soft brake line. And then I have a torque wrench, and this is going to help me to break free the 17mm bolts that are on the backside holding the caliper on. Once I get that loosened up, I'm going to use this socket wrench, because that'll give me a lot quicker motion on releasing the bolts. And then I have a dead blow hammer here. This is going to help me get off the rotors, work out some frustration as well. And then I have a C-clamp, and I also have a caliper press right there. And then this flathead screwdriver in case I need that for any of the clips or anything that I'm going to be working with. So those are all the tools that you want to have to start out this job. Okay, as far as parts go, we have a new rotor here. Looks a lot nicer than this one over here. So a new rotor. Brake pads, these come in a set, 2 pads for each tire. It's important to know which one is the front and which one is the back, so pay attention as you take them off and look for the indicators. These are what, when the brakes wear down, we start to get a squealing or screeching noise, and that's to let you know that your pads have worn down to the point where the indicators are now rubbing on the rotors. So check those out. Then the other thing is we'll grab a component kit. This will allow us to replace these rusted pins in here, as well as the little spring pin that'll hold them right in there. Okay, so passenger side is much easier to do than the driver's side here. Basically, you're pushing downwards to release these 17mm bolts here and there. So you're going to try to get those released, and I used a torque wrench for that. Worked pretty well. You're not going to think it's going to come loose, but with a little bit of liquid wrench right here, we can spray that on the bolts, being careful to not get it on the brake parts in there. And what we can do then is just let it sit for a couple minutes, and with a little bit of force it'll come off. So good luck with that. It's going to be a bit of a challenge, but you'll get through it. Okay, so after I broke those bolts free, I'm going to a socket wrench because that's going to be a whole lot easier to just kind of move these bolts off. They're fairly long bolts, so that'll be a whole lot quicker to get them out than using the torque wrench with that. So I switch up to a socket wrench after I've broken those bolts free. You can see they're broken free, and that's going to allow me for a little bit easier rotation taking out these bolts. So now I've got the last 17mm bolt in there on the top. I took the bottom one out first just so that was going to hold it in. And what I'm going to do is pop this clip out, and all I'm going to do is just take a hammer basically and give it a little knock from each side with this flathead screwdriver, and that will free up this brake line so that I can push this hard end back into this area, and that'll allow me to get the caliper out of the way when I'm working on removing the rotor and replacing the pads in here. So that clip is just knocked out of there, and now that's what's holding it from being pushed backwards. So we're going to move that backwards. What I did was I put a little bit of baling wire right up through here, and what I'm going to do is hang the caliper there. That way it's not hanging on that brake line. So you want to tie a nice little bend in this wire to make sure that you're supporting that as you're working on the rest of the assembly here. And there's the clip and the two 17mm bolts that I removed already. Okay, so I pulled that rotor off. If yours is frozen up at all on there, what you can do is just give it a little bit of a hit with a dead blow here, and that'll probably knock it loose. These usually aren't too stuck on there. It's only those two bolt attachments where we pulled out the 17mm bolts that you have the contact points with that. So it should pull off nicely, and then as you can see I have a wire hanger right in there that's holding the caliper up. So now I'm going to start working on the rotor. I'm hoping it's going to be easy to take off, but if the other one was any indication, it took quite a bit of banging, and I actually used a pry bar, used a cat's claw on the back to give it a little bit of force after I banged on it quite a bit with a couple different hammers. So we'll check back in a couple minutes here. Yeah, so same as the other side, this rotor is a pain in the ass. It's just pretty stuck on there, probably some rust underneath there, and this rotor does not have threaded holes to be able to pop off the rotors like you'd do with some other rotors. I've had that experience in the past, and that works out pretty well. But here we're just kind of going to try to bang this off of here. I've been using the dead blow, and I'm going to use also a cat's paw to pry it off in the back. And I'm going to use those same two bolt points back here because they're not moving, so hopefully that'll give me a little bit of leverage to be able to force this off of here. So I'm hearing some good noises. I gave it about 10 bangs with a framing hammer out on the outside there. You want to be really careful to not hit the lug nuts, or you'll have to replace those, which adds to this job. So basically what I did was I got back in behind here and got a little bit of leverage on it, and I'm hearing noises like that where it's breaking free. So I'm going to keep working on this and come back in a couple minutes. There we go. It wasn't a couple minutes, it was just another pull, and basically I've freed up that rotor. I'm ready to put my new rotor on. Okay, so I have the new rotor on. It looks great compared to the last one, of course, and here we can see that I still have to replace the pads. This is strung up on my little wire there holding me out of the way. And what I also did was put 2 lug nuts on here to basically get that rotor in the right place for when I do put the calipers back on in a couple minutes. Okay, next up is this little pin here, and all I'm going to do is just pull out the ends. Right there and right over here. Okay, so I just popped the pin out of there. This was the pin, and it basically was hooked in there like this. So I pulled it out of the ends and then took it out of there, and you'll have a new pin in your brake component set. Next thing I'm going to do is just pound these pins out using something that's smaller than the hole, and that's going to allow me to get it out and free up the old brake pads. And what I'll do then is push these pistons back in there a little bit. So I have the bottom pin out, and I'm going to take the top pin out as well. These you're going to replace with the brake kit here, the brake component kit. So you don't need to hold on to those. When you do put them back in, you want to put a lot of grease on there to be able to slide them into the new pads. And down over here, there's a little spring kind of retainer device that I think reduces the rattle in the brake system. So it goes right up here, and when you release the, or when you remove the bottom pin, it's going to come popping out, so be aware of that. And just save that. The new kit does not come with that, so I just put this back in on the other side, and I'll do the same on this side. Okay, so the same brake grease that you'll put in on these pins helped me get this top one out. So what I did was, it was basically so far out, and I just put a little bit of grease on the other side and then pushed it back through, and that loosened it up enough to get it out the other side. And I've just kind of been knocking it through with, really you could use anything that's going to fit through there that's smaller than the hull. Okay, so after I took out the old pads, I compressed in the calipers, and I did this with a C-clamp. I used the old brake pads on there to push them in, and then I got the new brake pads in there and the pins, and the next thing I'll do is put this retainer pin in on the side here. I have the brake pad back in place with the new rotor on. I'm just going to clean this up a little bit on top here. There was some dust that came down when I was doing the repair. And here, what I've done is just put the brake caliper back in place. It's not bolted on yet, and there's the clip that's going to hold the brake line back in place. So you want to make sure you have that in there to keep the brake line in the place where it's supposed to be. Okay, so we got the new rotor on there, we got the new brake pads back in here, pins have been reinstalled. I put the clip back on that side, and there's 2 17mm bolts securing it right there. The last thing I'm going to do before I put this wheel back on here is just put on this clip, and I think it's an anti-rattle clip. So I'm just going to clip that in there, and then we'll put the wheel back on. So that clip is installed back on there, and we're going to put the wheel back on. I'm just going to take off these 2 lug nuts. And again, I had them in place so the rotor was aligned correctly when I put the caliper on. I'm just finishing up here. I just got the lug nuts tight before I put the wheel back, or I get them fairly tightened before I put the wheel back on the ground. That way my tire is in fairly good position as I put some weight on it. And then once it's down there, I'll get it even tighter.